Welcome back to the Laura Dowling Experience podcast, where each week I bring you insightful and inspiring guests that will open your mind and empower your life. Before we get into today's episode, I would love to ask you for a little favour. If you like this podcast, and I know so many of you do, you could really help me out by giving it a nice rating, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the podcast. It may not seem like a big deal, but actually this really helps to keep the podcast high up in the charts, and that means that I can keep bringing you brilliant guests who are insightful, inspiring, and full of wisdom that we can all learn from. Thanks a million. Now let's get to it. This podcast episode is brought to you by the Brillo Cleaning Collection. I've recently brought the air fryer back into full rotation in our house. And when I say full rotation, I mean every single day, every single meal. The boys are absolutely obsessed. So the rule in our house is simple. If you use it, you clean it. And that's where the Brillo air fryer cleaner comes in. It makes the job genuinely easy. You simply spray it on, leave it for 30 seconds, wipe and rinse, and you're done. No endless scrubbing, no trays soaking in the sink. It's Good Housekeeping approved, meaning it's been rigorously tested by consumers and expert panels. And Brillo has 6 products in their new cleaning collection, all designed for the toughest household tasks. From unblocking the drain to getting your oven clean in minutes, not hours. So, if you're dealing with mould, limescale, or any of those stubborn jobs around the house, there's a Brillo product for it. Always follow preparation and usage instructions. Available nationwide. So many women tell me that after menopause they feel invisible, like no one is speaking to them anymore. And that is exactly why I created Shrooms Post-Menopause. With lion's mane, shilajit and targeted vitamins and minerals, it is designed to support your brain, your bones and your energy in this powerful stage of life. And with your first bottle, you get my free 7-day Thrive series with exercise and recipes delivered to your inbox. Post-menopause is not the end. It is strength, it is clarity, it is your time. Find Shrooms Post-Menopause now on fabulwellness.com and in pharmacies and health food stores nationwide. Well, today's episode is a very special one because we are recording it here at the European Parliament to mark International Women's Day in partnership with the European Parliament Liaison Office in Ireland. International Women's Day is a moment to celebrate the extraordinary achievements of women across Europe, but it is also a moment to pause and ask honest questions about leadership, opportunity, and the progress that still needs to happen. As a pharmacist, I spend my days speaking with women about their health, their challenges, and their ambitions at every stage of life. So I'm particularly interested in how policy and political leaderships shape the everyday realities women experience. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined here today by 2 women who are helping to shape those conversations at a European level. We have Kathleen Funchion and Cynthia Mhurchú, and they are both members of the European Parliament representing Ireland South, and they each bring very different experiences and perspectives to public life. Today we're going to talk about politics, leadership, women's health, and what it really means to serve in public life. Kathleen and Cynthia, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
We're getting the Oscoilga in throughout this podcast, and I'm delighted to see that. Ladies, before we get into politics and policy, I'd love to start with something simple. What first sparked your interest in public life? I'll let you answer that first, Kathleen.
Yeah, so I had a bit of maybe an unusual road into politics in that I never envisaged myself being a quote-unquote politician. I did social science as my degree in college. We would have grown up in a very strong trade union household. My dad worked for a trade union, so with a kind of strong sense of social justice, and I would have read a lot about Sinn Féin, and I was living in Dublin at the time, and I saw how active they were out on various campaigns and leafleting in areas, and kind of read more about them, and I decided that I'd like to get involved and join, which I did, and that was back in 2003 now. And I had relocated back to Kilkenny after college and got involved with the party locally, and I was asked would I consider putting my name forward. It would have been for the 2007 general election, I said, absolutely no way. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do the public element of it.
Yeah. Go on radio. And
all I could envisage was dead air time and like this panic and stuff. And there wasn't any elected representation for Kilkenny, for Sinn Féin in Kilkenny at the time. So we were coming from kind of a lower base as such. So eventually I said, okay, look, I'll give it a go. I'll see how it goes. There wasn't huge pressure, let's say, for example, like it would have been very difficult for us to take that seat. You wouldn't really go from zero straight into a TD role. So I gave it a go and I did enjoy it. I was certainly nervous at times, still get nervous about elements of the job. And I think it's important to say that because I think it's important to try and encourage women. Not everyone maybe feels they have the confidence to do it. I certainly felt like that at first, but then kind of maybe grew into the role a bit. And then it grew from there because I got elected in the 2009 local elections in Kilkenny. So I would have been the only Sinn Féin councillor for 5 years and the first one since 1923. So at first as well, there was times where it was a bit daunting, but I had huge support, I have to say, from people in all parties that were on the council as well. From Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour. The first time I was in, we had a Green Party mayor who is now Senator Malcolm Noonan. So I often look back on that 5 years and think the kind of working together aspect that happened for the good of Kilkenny City as it was Kilkenny Borough Council was a huge kind of learning experience and a really nice introduction, I think, for me, you know. So,
and you weren't on any student councils or anything like that when you were in college, or so it was literally just you found your way in that way?
Yeah, not on any student councils or not on any kind of debating teams or anything like that. So, which I think shows that, you know, I try and when I'm speaking to other women who are maybe considering it, you can get into it, you can start. A lot of people think, oh, I'd love to do it, but I'm nervous or I don't have the confidence. And I think it's important that we try and encourage women from all backgrounds and from all experiences, you know.
Yeah, and Cynthia, you have a slightly different story. How did you get into it?
Yeah, but I just want to say that Kathleen is talking about garnering support from people around her to assist her, to help her grow into it. But can I just say, from my view of Kathleen as a constituent of hers, because we're in Carlow Kilkenny together, she has an amazing talent and she won't shine a light on it because that's the type of person she is, but she had and has an amazing talent, and that's testament to the vote that you got in Carlow Kilkenny. Now I'm talking about the vote you got as a TD. I mean, it's a huge vote, and also the vote that you got in the European elections. So I just want to say that Kathleen did get a vote from me. You didn't always get number one when I was voting in Carlow Kilkenny.
Thanks, Cynthia.
But I recognised, and I'm not being sycophantic when I say this, because it's very important anyway for female politicians to support other female politicians and throw the ladder across and up and down and all around and get more in. But Kathleen really shone out in that constituency. There's another woman who's a Fianna Fáil woman, that's Jennifer Murnane O'Connor, and I will mention her as well. But I think women in politics, not just in the Carlow Kilkenny constituency, I think they strive to get on better because they realise that there's fewer of us in it. And yes, and the route in is not always the easiest route that you can see for men to get into it, because in men's case, it's very traditional, it's almost expected. The door is firmly open and fully open for the men to get in, but for the women more difficult. From my point of view, I'm a latecomer to politics. I ran when I was 57 years of age, that's a couple of years ago. I feel though, and that was party politics obviously, I feel though I've been a politician from the time I grew up in Carlow as a little girl. My mother was a very involved person in the community, whether it was teaching adults how to read and write, or whether she was singing in the choir, Carlow Choral Society, or in fact whether she was the secretary for the local branch of Fine Gael at the time, and my father was on the Fianna Fáil side. So I feel as if she in particular, my dad was more shy, more reserved, but I feel she really introduced me to a life outside of the home. And she sang. Now, funnily enough, singing is not what I do for a living now. Obviously, I talk, but singing and talking are related. And that public performance, even in a choir, as one of many voices, that really influenced me. And very quickly in school, I volunteered to be on the debating team, or I volunteered, you know, to lead out on this, that or the other. Or
well, you came bustling into the cafe for our coffee beforehand and you were like a wind.
A whirlwind.
Diagwitch here, diagwitch there. You really were. So I can see that you have that performative aspect to your personality, which is wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and that helps in politics. And I suppose it did lead me in a circuitous route to politics, because I started off in teaching, where you do need to perform for your lovely little children. I had rang a hen in Ngail Scully Gaharlach, so that was lovely. And I have to say, teaching, it's not a career. I mean, it's a vocation.
Yeah, definitely.
What you give, you get back. Mulla noiga gus tuchashi. You know, once you encourage that, you will get it back in spades. And then after that, I fell into broadcasting, but it was so right when I fell into it. And my teaching job was no more. I had to find a job, and Gaeilge was my route in, because I went to co-present a programme called Cursey with RTE. So then it made sense that I was speaking again for a living, or I was performing, and I was debating and journalism and all of that. And that happened for about 10 years. And then during that period, I said, I really would like to be a barrister. And there was a nighttime course that a lot of journalists were doing in Dublin at the time. A lot. Vincent Brown, Teresa Lowe, Alex White, a lot of us. And I did it as well. And then suddenly I decided I'm going to jump ship from RTE, and I'm going into the advocacy role as a barrister. And I did that for 25 years. I have to pinch myself. Maybe it's the same for you, Kathleen. Sometimes you think, oh, I only did that for a few years.
Time flies.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, you were just saying that. It was 17 years later, I'm here, you know, after beginning your political career. So it is interesting.
Yeah. So I have to say, I haven't looked back. I would encourage anybody, but particularly women, to come into politics. And I don't think, I mean, obviously, they would require some advice and some critical advice to know exactly what they're entering into. But then it depends on the personality that's entering into it. And there's no given recipe for success of any particular personality or any expectation. But I think in general, women should be supported financially as well to run in politics. And of course, you have to run from the ground up, generally from the county council level.
Yeah.
Both of you are making very valid points about trying to encourage more women into politics. However, we do hear that women in particular are a lot of them are targeted with online abuse, misogynistic abuse. I actually just attended a 2-hour talk here today in the Parliament, and women were talking about their experience of misogyny, of online social media violence, and why we need to put these laws and policies into place to try and help women. Have you experienced that type of... It is online violence, that's what they're calling it now.
Yeah.
And how have you dealt with it? Because I think sometimes it would take thick skin to be able to put up with it, or do you just not watch it, or do you have someone moderate it? Like, how do you deal with that? Because you can feel very exposed, and I'll let you answer that thing.
So I think that this is something that's becoming like a real serious barrier to women entering politics. So I find that when you're chatting to women, like let's say in the run-up to the last local elections, I would have spoken to various women in Sinn Féin throughout the country around, would you consider running, or someone maybe who was thinking about it, because I had, you know, I've gone in a number of elections, and then as a single parent as well, there was lots of different elements that I would say that you can kind of surmount as such. And I found when talking to women, confidence obviously is a big one, but the second biggest barrier was the social media, that people would say, I don't want to have to experience that. I don't want my family, in particular, women with kids, didn't want kids, you know, their children to see it. I honestly think that every woman in politics has experienced some level of online, just as you say, misogyny, like, because it's actually just discussing some of the comments that, I mean, everyone in politics is open to a level of online harassment, I suppose, but what women get is...
And even with the advent of AI now, they're able to put out pictures of people with no clothes on, like awful stuff.
Now, I think over the years, when I would have first experienced that, I would have been really devastated and overanalyzing every comment and being thinking, who is this person? Do I know them? You know, what experience have I had with them? And then I realised these are all just haters, basically. So you're better off. Now I'm very comfortable blocking people. Okay. I have no issue whatsoever doing that. I do like to read comments that are on various posts you put up, because people are interacting with you as well. So you don't want to ignore everything. Yeah. But I would pick my platforms. There's some platforms that I would never...
Which is the nastiest? X. Oh, yeah, okay.
You know.
What about you, Cynthia? Have you experienced it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Kathleen and I have, probably spoken about this in the back of cars when we're travelling around to and from airports and that kind of thing, or on buses or whatever. Oh yeah, it's a feature. And it really does depend on the recipient of it and the person who's suffering under it. As Kathleen said, initially in politics, she would have had one reaction, more laterally, a different type of reaction. But for somebody who's at a particular stage in life that they haven't experienced before, it's obviously dire.
Yeah.
It's absolutely dire, and it's enough to turn them off. And in fact, that's what we saw, which was very unfortunate in Gráinne Seoige's case. She was an excellent candidate, and unfortunately she's subjected to that awful abuse. And of course, that was going to interfere with her attempt to get a seat in the Dáil and so forth. And she's only one example. In my case, yes, I've been receiving negative comments, disgusting comments, misogynistic comments, sexual harassment and sexual violation type comments from the get-go. Do I look at them? Yes, sometimes. Do I get my team to inform me? Yes, sometimes. Do we make decisions about removing them and reacting to them? Yes, we do. And do they get to me? In general, no. Now, the reason why I am at the stage in life now where I didn't have an online presence because it didn't exist when I was working first as a teacher and then working as a journalist. I mean, I can still remember the big mobile phones that we went around with. Okay, we didn't have smartphones. So what I'm saying is I came from a world where I experienced sexism, misogyny in reality. So it was very much first-hand experienced and lived. And you live it through taking it on orally, or, you exit the situation, or you talk to somebody else at work. Now, then we fast forward to now, and what I'm experiencing now online is just more of the same, except it's way more vile, because obviously in the real world, nobody would pass a comment in relation to a sexual violent act that they want to carry out on you and to your face. If you're sitting in an office, it would be much more subtle than that, or it would be the instances that we've heard about in the Me Too movement type of thing. But for me, I'm able to park it, not ignore it, because we shouldn't, but I'm able to park it but mobilise my reaction to it into political activism. So I've actively looked to be on particular committees or to be involved in particular groups to actually tackle this. As you say in your introduction, the question, I mean, it is more legislation and also tooling up new women coming into Fianna Fáil, making sure that there is a component of any training to get into politics or to run as a councillor that touches on this and deals with this and explains exactly what's involved and how to deal with it and where to get help. Because you cannot just land a female candidate into it. And of course, it's predominantly female. There's no point in pretending, that there are. And I'm sure there are some men, particularly men of a different colour, a different creed, a different look. Yes, of course, they will be targeted. And in Fianna Fáil that has happened. And it's disgusting and I call it out. But look, the keyboard warriors, they like to attack minorities. And a lot of them feel that women are in the minority. I kid you not. So we're in there with all the groups they attack.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think we just need to be consistently pushing forward, but I can't see them being able to completely block that at all. Anyway.
Kathleen's right, you pick and choose. You pick and choose what platforms you're on as well.
Yeah, and I also think as well that, what I would like to see, and I think would be a big help. Now, it's not going to solve absolutely everything, but I do think people should have to be ID verified. I don't think it's right that, I always say, I could leave this show now in the next few minutes and go off and create 10 different fake emails, link them up to 10 different, social media profiles. That's unacceptable. You should have to be ID verified. Now, there is some people that have no issue having their name associated with their comments, but I do think that it would put off a lot of people and it would start getting the message out, because what I always find interesting is if you get a really negative comment and if you see that person somewhere and then they're maybe, say hello to you, you think, do they not realise you've seen that comment? It's like they think they're...
So that has happened?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like they think they're in a different world.
Okay.
It's like I think people forget that actually it's a public forum. I wonder as well maybe if there was an advertisement campaign or around this. And it might sound a bit silly, but you are actually on a public forum here. Don't forget that. You wouldn't ring up your local radio station and start talking like that about someone. So why do you think you can do it just because you're at home in your room or wherever, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the good old days, we had the laws of libel and the laws of defamation.
Yeah.
So when I was a journalist writing articles...
Anymore, do they?
Yeah, well, obviously they do in print and they do online and all of that once your byline is there. But if I wrote an article for the Sunday Independent way back in whatever, the 80s, the 90s, and put down, written by Cynthia and Mhurchú, I mean, I had to make sure, first of all, through my own training in journalism, that it wasn't defamatory of the subject I was writing about or the person or the thing or whatever. And then it would go through the rigours. If there was any question about it, it would go to the lawyers in the Sindo or some other paper I was working for. But of course, it's an open forum. It's a public forum online. I think Kathleen is bang on the money when she says ID verification.
Yeah.
So recently I got some information from Cathal Crowe TD, who's a backbencher TD from County Clare. And Cathal was saying that he gets an awful lot of emails, as I'm sure Sinn Féin TDs and councillors do, and obviously all councillors do, all parties, and they're anti-immigrant. And of course, there's a big, big wave of anti-immigrant sentiment out there, driven by the far right, by the hatred, the disinformation, the misinformation, all about immigration. But he looked at these emails that are coming through to him in the middle of the night, and he communicated with most of them on a given day, as I understand it from Cathal. And he said, are you a constituent? What is your full name? What is your phone number? Can I engage with you? No. They came back with only a first name and there was no follow through. And then he looked at the line upon which, or the times upon which they came in. And they came in at a time when everybody in Ireland was asleep, but everybody on another side of Europe, closer to Russia, was awake.
Okay.
I'm not jumping to conclusions in that regard, but I'm just saying ID verification, exactly, full name, full disclosure.
Yeah.
It brings a level of responsibility, you know.
Of course, yeah. So International Women's Day, which is Sunday, is a moment to reflect on progress and also on what still needs to change. In your view, what's the biggest barrier that women in Europe still face today? I'll ask you, Cynthia.
Sure. The biggest barrier, equal pay. I could go on. I mean, equal right to healthcare, equal access to lots of things in life. But money helps an awful lot if you want to achieve parity and if you want to have a job and you want to pay for private childcare, which most people can't afford to pay for, but also if you want to get ahead, and it depends obviously on what get ahead means to you. I'm absolutely convinced that some women obviously would like to stay at home and they can't, or some women do choose to stay at home and that's their choice. I'm all pro-choice. But if we take the pro-choice and go straight into the abortion debate, I think across Europe, we had a recent resolution, as Kathleen knows. I'm sure we voted in the same way, My Voice, My Choice, to make sure that that campaign succeeded, whereby a dedicated fund, which didn't end up to be a dedicated fund, but there is funding now across Europe whereby somebody who's prevented from obtaining an abortion in their European home country can seek to get it in another country in Europe by virtue of this funding. Now, it's absolutely incredible that in 2026, I thought to myself, this is incredible that we're voting on this resolution. That should be a given. The same thing with access to whether it's medical treatment or whether it's medical devices or anything to do with medicine. It's very much geared around the male preserve. You could say access to law or to legal restitution, or you could talk about domestic violence. Kathleen and I advocate in that space all the time. And I was a lawyer and I dealt with women who are subjected to domestic violence, and very few men, but there was a male or two client. So there's a huge amount of work still to be done. I'm happy to do it, but we need to get more men into the space, because remember, even though the participation of women in the European Parliament is good, it's above the Dáil, it's above the Oireachtas back home in Ireland, it's still not at that parity. And really, for me, parity is where it's at. If we don't have the female voice at the table and in the policy decisions and behind the table and behind in the back rooms, we're not going to drive these particular agenda items to the top of the agenda.
But also the men need to be involved too. For instance, I was at that talk today that went on for hours, and there was only a handful of men in the room and the place was crowded full of women. So it was about violence online towards women. and it was really only women that were taking up space in the room. So
Kathleen would be very good to comment on that, because I'm sure you remember, as I do, in the hemicycle in Strasbourg when we voted on My Voice, My Choice. To me, it was in the debate, in the run-up, it was all women.
That's right, yeah.
So few men in the chamber.
There was very few people in the chamber, full stop, but there was very few men as well. And we do need men in the conversation. And I think that we have to try and encourage men, I suppose, into, like, sometimes I think they think International Women's Day events, is it just for women? But it's like, actually, no, you need to be in. And I have 2 sons, so I want to make sure that they are living their lives in the right way as well.
The name itself, International Women's Day, maybe they do feel that they can't be involved, or maybe, you know, sexual violence against women or violence against women online, maybe they feel that's a woman's issue. Whereas it's a man and women's issue,
They all have sons or daughters, or they all have a wife, or they all have a daughter who needs to be protected. I mean, I think we've made great strides in the last mandate, and fair play to Frances Fitzgerald MEP. She's now retired from the House. But she did a huge amount in relation to a directive, a law, which was basically dealing with all forms of violence against women, whether it was in the real world or in the online space and so forth. And there was a major drive on. She spent years and years, along with other colleagues, to get the directive over the line. And she did. And since then, we've seen it spilling over into national politics with Norma Foley, say, TD and Minister for Fianna Fáil. And there now is a national policy and strategy for young women and girls, which is not only looking at violence, but it's looking at education and at access to education and access, whether it's to sport or everything else that we see is so taken as a given for men. And let's not forget that, of course, we want men involved in the space, but sometimes we need a female leader to get the men involved in the space. Maybe, you know, as Kathleen Funchion has a female leader, Sinn Féin, maybe that point resonates more with Sinn Féin.
Yeah, no, it's the point you're making. And can I just make a comment, because obviously we are in the same constituency, and before I ever actually even met Cynthia or came across her, I would have dealt with a lot of women that dealt with Cynthia from a legal point of view, as the person that was supporting them through exiting domestic violence and various really negative relationships. And she had a very strong reputation as being a strong advocate for women.
I'm not surprised.
I actually always remember people saying, like, you know, if you had Cynthia, like, you were going to be okay in court and stuff like that. So just to acknowledge that, though, too, to be fair.
I'm not surprised, Cynthia.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Well, I think my mother was a feminist when you weren't really allowed to be a feminist. I mean, she grew up in a household where the boys went to boarding school because they were boys. Fair enough. That was the social mores of the time. The boys inherited the farm. She came from a farm. The boys were going to inherit the farm. The boys were going to go to private boarding school or whatever. The girls were going to go to the local school in town. And they weren't really going to go to third level either. And she didn't. And I remember as a child, I mean, she questioned decisions of the Catholic Church. Obviously, at the time, we were brought up in the Catholic environment because Ireland was all Catholic back then. But she was questioning things. And she was saying, well, no, this is not good for women, for example.
It started from a young age for you.
Oh, no, it did.
Politics can sometimes feel distant from everyday life.
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier about we think that there's a bit of an apathy when it comes to Europe and back home, and how Irish people see Europe and MEPs and what you're actually doing over here. What is one EU decision or policy that genuinely makes a difference to people's daily lives in Ireland, even if most of them do not realise it, Kathleen?
Yeah, so first of all, I think sometimes people will say, oh, I don't follow politics or I don't have an interest, but I would always say to everybody that politics is about everything in your life. So politics is, are you having difficulty accessing a school for your child with additional needs? Politics is, how long are you waiting on a waiting list for a procedure in hospital? A lot of things come down to political decisions. So just to make that point, I suppose. But I think I go back to stuff around workers' rights, because I used to work for a trade union before being a TD. And I think a lot of people don't realise that a lot of our very strong workers' rights legislation in Ireland came from Europe. And I'll pick one as an example, which is the Organisation of Working Time Act, which is around holiday leave and breaks and various entitlements, around bank holidays or public holidays, stuff like that. And particularly, I suppose, maybe for anyone younger generations, they wouldn't know that. That is something that has definitely had a positive impact on workers in Ireland, and it came from Europe. And then, as we're talking about women, stuff around gender equality.
Yes.
Like up until 1973, there was the marriage bar in Ireland.
Yes.
Where if you were in the civil service and you were a woman, you had to give up your job once you got married. And that changed in 1973. And that 100% was down to the various directives that were coming from Europe.
Okay, well, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a raft of employment rights, a raft. I could go on about the right to paternity leave, maternity leave, short-term leave, the right to get your paycheck, the right to get your pay slip. You could go on and on and on. All of these were brought in via Europe, and that's only in the employment sphere.
Yeah.
Then if we look at environment, or we look at trade, or, whatever we look at, it's the exact same story. And particularly the anti-bullying, the anti-harassment, and not being harassed on grounds of gender or religion or all of those grounds started in Europe and then came into national legislation. There's one piece that I suppose, to bring it up to date for me and relevant to where I'm at the minute. I'm on a committee line called the Internal Market Consumer Protection. So we're looking after consumers, making sure they're protected in Europe. We're looking after the internal market. We're making sure that it works for businesses as well as consumers and so forth. And one thing that I've been asked to be chief negotiator on for my political group, so I'm with Renew Europe, is on medical tech devices. Okay? It's a bit of a mouthful. Anyway, there's a directive on it. It's an EU directive on medical tech devices. So the likes of Boston Scientific in Cork, the likes of Stryker in Cork, they make these things called implants or catheters. They go into your heart. They might help you in diagnostics, might help you in treating something cancerous in your body. But they're medical devices, And I've seen them, and I suppose everybody knows what I'm talking about. But this is the point. Because of the directive that I've been asked to update, the directive has slowed down the licensing and the rollout of those devices to save maybe my uncle or my aunt or my husband or yours in Europe. And it's far quicker for the licensing and the rollout to happen in America and in China and Japan. So it's a matter of months in those countries, whereas in Europe, it's a matter of years. Now, the difference on the ground to the voter is they might not get the treatment, or they might not get the life-saving device to actually save their lives in time. So these regulations and these directives are constantly updated and made sure that any competitiveness and any red tape which has interfered with medical tech devices or anything else such as trade, or we could go on and on, the environment, that it doesn't slow down the benefits of those being received by the voters of Ireland South or Ireland or the rest of Europe. Now, when you try and explain that in a soundbite on a current affairs programme or some other programme that we're on, it's kind of tricky. So you have to be ready with your headlines to explain to people. Because remember, back home in Carlow, where I live, Kathleen is in Kilkenny, right? But if you take any rural town, let's just pick the towns there. Could be Tiptown, could be Clonmeltown, whatever. Could be Carrasiveen. They're concerned about the cost of living crisis. They're concerned about the cost of rental, and they are concerned about not being able to ever afford a house, or maybe nearly never afford a house, or where are the building houses or whatever. And then they've got a heating crisis, and then et cetera, et cetera. So they're called the basics of living. So it's very hard for them to go, God, Cynthia, God, Kathleen, you are doing great work in the long-term benefits for us. Because it is more long-term and it is slow to get.
Is that frustrating?
It's extremely slow here.
Frustrating?
It's extremely slow here. It's very frustrating, I find. And I am someone who went from local to national to here, and I just couldn't get over, even when you were just really practical stuff around when you're first elected as an MEP and getting your own, offices and staff and everything set up. The process is painfully slow and no common sense whatsoever.
The amount of interfaces I had to do online to actually even get over here and get my badge over here
is crippling.
Yeah. And it must actually be it must be a huge labour cost for that. The amount of hours wasted with that kind of thing too.
Well, yes, you're right. Now, one good thing about Europe is that it's democratic.
Yes.
And that it's fair. And it's open and it's transparent. And lots of people on the far right or the far left or whatever side they're on would disagree with me on that. But just for the minute, me as a centrist, slightly left of centre politician, I would be saying, listen, That is the beauty and that is the unique selling point about Europe, that we are open and transparent and we make sure that any legislation, which takes a long time to enact, if we go back to the medical tech devices or if we go to the Digital Markets Act or the Digital Services Act or something, anything that takes a number of years, and it does take a number of years to enact, means that every political group, Kathleen's, mine, and all the other groups that are in the Parliament are most definitely included in a meaningful way. Not in a cursory way, not in a dismissive way, because the amount of technical detail, and I know it's slow, and Kathleen's right, but Kathleen, is it for the betterment of all? I think it might be.
Some things I think, we have to give time. But then in a lot of situations, I feel like, is there any common sense over here at all? Yeah. But that can be true of lots of different things. I found that a lot of the time when I was in the Dáil as well, that it just felt like there was...
face.
Yeah, and... just that there is a lack of common sense sometimes. There is a lack of kind of practicality being applied. And that's actually why we need more women as well, because I feel like women come with like solution focused.
We're like, we don't have time for this.
Yeah.
We need to get going.
Because we're very good at juggling. And we know that we can do actually 10 jobs if we make one of those jobs far simpler and far more streamlined. Now, look, in fairness to the powers that be out here in Europe, and Kathleen and I know this and we're listening to it constantly, Draghi and Letty, the two infamous reports about the loss of competitiveness in Europe and how much this mandate is about cutting red tape. And if Frau von der Leyen, the President of the Commission, has said it once, she said it a million times. And all the commissioners, including Michael McGrath, our Irish commissioner, is tasked with that as well. And they're doing a thing called omnibuses, whereby legislation is being shrunken down into an omnibus without diluting standards and so forth. But Kathleen is right. Common sense. The red tape, let's get back to the farmer in Kilkenny, the farmer in Carlow, Wexford, all of our constituency counties, because we're in the same constituency, so we know the same issues. They farm all day. They then go in to have their dinner in the middle of the day, and then they go in to have their supper in the evening. And after the supper, they have reams of paper. I've seen it. I've made lots of constituency visits. I've had lots of meetings. So has Kathleen. She knows what I'm talking about. They are literally filling out forms to beat the band all night. They don't have time. So what they do is they employ an accountant to fill out their BIS forms. That's one of the forms they have to do, or their acres form, or their other form for the farm payments. That's at a cost. That's costing. And that's only one example of a farmer. Think about business people who are trying to sell.
Community groups who have... They're all voluntary boards of management where they end up saying, look, we can't deal with these forms. And then they're potentially missing out on, grants and different things. So that's where we need to get some sort of a correct balance. And that's why I think what's good, I suppose, about MEPs from Ireland as well, because there's various countries that hold their elections differently. They have like a list system and stuff, whereas Irish MEPs are facing the electorate every 5 years and are out and about in their constituencies on a regular basis. I know MEPs from other countries are too, but I don't think maybe as much as the Irish ones, because that's the only way you have to engage, you have to talk to people, you have to consult with people, and getting all of those experience and all those examples like Cynthia's talking about, you're able to kind of say, well, I think this is how it could be different, and I do think that we're in a unique situation in Ireland, maybe compared to some of the others.
In Ireland, you find it's very much about local politics then, that's what's very important to people.
All politics is local, as they say.
It's local. Okay. It's about tar on the roads, if I can give you that little sort of image. Yeah. Everybody wants to see a bit of tar thrown on the road, and they normally look to politicians for it. Or everybody needs their special needs assistant, or everybody needs assistance if they want to get the handball alley erected somewhere in County Kilkenny or County Tipperary. They want to know, how am I going to get through these reams of forms to actually get... And this is for the good of communities.
I know.
We want to protect communities.
And it's very frustrating when you see groups that are just fantastic individuals who are volunteers. They've been volunteering with committees in their towns and villages for years. And if there was funds available for them, there should be a mechanism that can help them apply for that, so they don't have to feel they get so bamboozled with stuff that they can't, and that they miss out on it.
I'm hoping that the youth will help us to promote Europe and help us to, I don't want to use the word, but it's coming to mind now, save Europe and the European project, because there is a bit of saving involved in it. We want to renew people's trust in it, and particularly in our democratic institutions, because they're under attack with the rise of the far right. There's 1/3 of the parliamentarians in our parliament are far right. Now, far right are basically, in my view, Kathleen will have her own views, but they are obstructionist. They are full of the message of mistrust and misinformation and disinformation and coming down very hard on minorities. So think of Orbán in Hungary from within, or think of somebody like without Putin in Russia. And we do need to make sure that our youth understand the vital value of Europe, born out of a peace project at the end of World War II. And yes, it is slow. Yes, we do have to make reparation in that regard, and we have to speed up decision making, and we also have to speed up legislation and make it simpler and so forth. But it's really worth fighting for. Europe is very much worth fighting for, and it is their future because they're much more mobile. Young people are. I mean, they're all over Europe and they're all over the world now.
What part of the political system do you think rewards wrong behaviour?
A political system rewarding wrong behaviour. Oh, in my view, this is simple. I like accountability. And if accountability is not open, transparent, and if accountability is not brought to bear on a situation, for example, of overspending or misspending on a project, I don't like that. And that should never be rewarded in the political system, and particularly when it comes to taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
So taxpayers' money, for example, I'll give you a concrete example. Yesterday I was on the airwaves talking about Iarnód because I'm on a transport committee, so I look at all things transport. And public transport, very important. We've got a green agenda, an environmental agenda. We want to make our roads safer, so get people onto the trains. Right, great. Iarnód. So I'm looking at Iarnód. A lot of email constituents write to me and tell me what a bad customer experience they've had on Iarnód, on the intercity service or on the regional service or whatever. So I'm constantly looking at that, and I got a Freedom of Information request replied to tell me that Iarnód spent 150,000 in 2024, 150,000 euros on 5,500 claims of dissatisfied customers. And I thought to myself, if that was only for a year, if you multiply that out over 10 years, that could be a whopping 1.5 million of taxpayers' money, because Iarnód has a public service contract with the government, obviously, to provide this. So I don't like misspending. And if misspending happens, I want it open and transparent. And I want to know that changes will be made whereby it won't happen again. Because it's taxpayers' money. I mean, it's not fair.
Kathleen, what is the political issue that many politicians privately recognise as a problem but would often be reluctant to address directly?
Yeah, so interesting question. Personally, I have to say, I think any issue that I think is an issue, I'd always be comfortable to say that, because I do feel really strongly that, as I said at the start, I wasn't someone that saw myself as a politician. Like, kind of what you see is what you get with me. I feel really passionate about issues around children, around women, and I would kind of never make any apology for advocating for them. But I do think that issues that do affect women and children don't get the attention and the focus that they deserve. And I think maybe not the issue that what you're saying around that people feel uncomfortable talking about, but I think there's issues that fall into ones that everyone will say, oh yes, we want to do something about that. But actually then when it comes to action, there's very little done. And I think women, particularly women's health and issues around children, particularly protection of children online, I think there's a lot of lip service, a lot of talk around those two issues, but not very much action. Yeah. So rather than it being an issue that people maybe privately feel differently about, I think there's issues that we see that people will say, oh, of course we support that. But then when you look at track records, or when you look at what are they actually doing about it, and a perfect example is what Cynthia was saying earlier on the discussion that we had around in the last Parliament, or around the UN report on women. I think someone said at one point there was 30 MEPs in the room, and they were predominantly women. Now there's over 700 MEPs. So I feel that there's more issues that fall into that category, where there's a lot of kind of talk and lip service and, yeah, of course we agree with you, but not a lot of action, rather than stuff that people feel privately differently about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And you're very passionate about domestic violence and helping women with that. And I know men do experience it too. And you did go public with your own experience of coercive control. How did that shape you in terms of how you want to change policy?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I would have always had a really good working relationship with Amber, which would be the domestic violence refuge in Kilkenny, and it covers parts of Carlow as well. And like I would have felt really strongly about the issue for a long time when I was counsellor and as TD. But then actually being in that type of a relationship, was a whole different experience. So what I feel I've kind of, I suppose if you want to say, if any good is to come out of that situation, I would love to see us being able to speed up the court process and also have more supports in the court process for people, because you do have a situation where, now I was really lucky, I had a fantastic detective and he would meet me on the day of a court appearance and everything, but you could have a situation where if someone didn't have good support.
So you just said it there, you were lucky, it was like a postcode lottery almost maybe, whereas someone else may not get it.
You could technically, in our smaller towns as well, like court rooms or, court houses are going to be smaller. You could be walking in at the exact same time as they're walking in. They're down to those basic things. And that's not necessarily a funding issue. That's someone thinking, how do we change the system issue? And I would also like to see, from an Irish perspective, the protective services units in the Gardaí. I just had an incredible experience with them. Again, like I think we're very, very lucky in Kilkenny with the division that we have. But the training, the specialised training that they have, I think we need to see more of that, but it comes down to resources. And like, as particularly now, a lot of the stuff is online, a lot of the stuff is phone. That was the case in my situation as well. So they need that technical expertise.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, and this is where I think Europe could play a role, would be around education and awareness, because it might sound very kind of basic, but a lot of the experience I had, particularly in the early parts of the relationship, when you kind of are, wondering about red flags, thinking, you're doubting yourself, you're questioning yourself. They were all stuff that when I was growing up, we were told these were great things. If someone was jealous, that was a great sign they really liked you. If they had like this love bombing, that was never an expression I had heard. Gaslighting, that was never an expression I had heard. So things like that around education and awareness. And I'd love to see dedicated funding from a European perspective being rolled out to various countries, that you'll be able to actually access that funding on a yearly basis and do programmes, whether it's in schools, age appropriate. There's loads of stuff going on.
There is a group called Two Into You, and they specifically talk to teenage girls about that.
Yeah. And most of the groups don't necessarily have funding that they know they're going to have year on year.
Yeah.
Like Amber and Kilkenny do a great programme called Start Safe. And like that, it's all about green flags, red flags. But like that, they do that on their own initiative. And loads of refuges throughout Ireland do their own really good work. But it's all people doing it if they can, if they have the funding. I'd love to see that there would be dedicated funding, because we have to talk about the prevention piece. We need the supports, obviously, when someone's going through it and coming out of the situation. But if we're not talking about the prevention and how we get young men engaged in it from an early age as well, that they can realise that this is not this is not. I think controlling relationships as well, they're starting to creep in at other levels. We're seeing an awful lot of parental to child, elderly parents maybe feeling that they're being controlled by adult children. So it's
the harassment.
It's so nuanced though, isn't it?
What Kathleen did was nothing short of heroic, coming out as a public figure, knowing that she was going to be subjected, I presume, to tons of abuse for coming out. I hope you didn't read. I certainly didn't read the comments online, but I'm only assuming that they were there, that you came out to speak out. But what Kathleen did was she showed the way. She didn't tell, she showed it. And the message lands quicker with female victims if they're shown the way, particularly by somebody as respected in the community or in the constituency or whatever, as Kathleen. And it's really important to delve into this problem, this whole problem of domestic and sexual violence, because it is one of the major issues of our time. And I know we're talking now about Israel and USA attacking Iran, and I know we're talking about Trump's tariffs, we're talking about that awful illegal invasion going on for over 4 years in Ukraine, and there's big problem. We've seen that awful, atrocious war in Gaza and all of that. But the level of violence against women in Ireland, let's get back to little old Ireland, our dear Green Isle, it's off the charts. And I mean every form of violence, okay? The stats are there. And I know that the Minister for Justice at the moment has committed, since he's come into office, Minister Jim has committed that he's going to tackle this, whether it's through refuges or through the education space or whether the prevention space or the Garda units being set up, everything that Kathleen has talked about. But we need to stamp this out. Because this is about democracy, not a high-flying word, democracy now. This is about mutual respect, recognition and democracy, and women being entitled not only to be involved in the democratic politics, but in democratic life and to live their lives and not be wondering, who's following me? I'm going home from the theatre now tonight or the pub tonight. Who's following me? Do I need to keep talking to my partner at home on the phone until I get to the nearest dart or the nearest bus? This is unacceptable. And it's happening on our doorstep.
Yeah. Now, and it's happening within the home as well. And that's...
Yeah.
And then we talked...
And can I just ask you as well, because the court system, and Kathleen touched on it, is notoriously slow. Yeah. And I have known women and I have interviewed women who said it is so torturously slow that they nearly just give in. Yeah. Because
the court system is not victim friendly.
No,
and
even down to the point that a survivor's counselling notes can be read by...
That's going to be changed.
Okay.
That's all going to be changed.
Why is it so slow?
Look, it's slow. Why? Politics in general, you need political will. What does that mean? You need a person like Kathleen, who's in the decision-making chair as minister or as junior minister or as Taoiseach or Taoiseach or whoever. But you need the will of the politician who is leading out on the department that is responsible for that particular change, whether it's in law, whether it's in environment, whether it's in, something else, flood relief or whatever. But you need a politician who is able to lead. And to be honest with you, from where I'm sitting and from where I am, I would prefer to see more women leading out in that regard.
Yeah.
Because I do think we have a slightly more ambitious, practical approach. And I think we would be saying, stop now, stop the delay. Wait now. No, we need to move this on a bit quicker. So what is the obstacle there you're speaking about? Just give me an answer for that. Give me a few answers. Without
then the barriers to women going into it. So I think I feel there's the barrier to entry for women because of everything that is expected from a political public life. And that's the problems, the barrier to entry. Then there's when you're in the job and the problems that you have to put up with there. So
I think if there was a higher critical mass of female ministers or of junior ministers or whatever you want to call them, or leaders, that they would be able to cut through a lot of the excuses, if they are excuses, to interrogate them quicker and interrogate them more, and then to actually say, look, we need to produce results. Now, of course, male politicians are doing that, but they're just doing it in a different way.
But in the event of that not happening, because there aren't a lot of women going into politics and taking up those leadership roles. So how can we change the court system in the medium term even?
I do think women want to get into politics, though, and I do think that I think a lot of women don't see themselves as politicians, or they don't see themselves in that role. They could be the most active person in their community, the most active person on a campaign, maybe for whatever the issue might be, but they don't necessarily see one following the other. And that's where there's an onus on political parties, on all political parties, to ensure that they're encouraging, that they're seeking out women, that they're putting, whether it's support. You could have someone that might say, I remember we used to sometimes have the meetings in my house when my kids were younger because it was easier. Little things, that's a very small example now, but little things.
That's actually a really important example.
Very important example.
You're at home with your kids.
Women are juggling. Yeah. Sorry, we don't have time to be going to the greyhound track if we're a county councillor, to be meeting up, or to the golf club or wherever they go, the rugby club, to be meeting up and chatting at the games because we're reading the bedtime stories. Now, of course, some men are doing it as well, don't get me wrong, but in general, I'm taking the general approach. You asked, what can we do in the court system to speed it up? Well, I'll tell you what we can do. We, as politicians, can keep lobbying our departments, Department of Justice, Jim O'Callaghan, the Minister for Justice, and every other politician involved on the opposition side, Sinn Féin, to make sure that their private members' bills or their legislation is pushed forward and pushed on in this regard. but it means that it has to emanate from someplace. And in general, as we're coming circular now, in general, in the domestic violence space, there's an awful lot of women involved in the refuges or in the sexual assault clinics or in the court system. I worked as a barrister, specialising in family law, which dealt with a lot of things, right? But in particular, domestic violence. Most of my colleagues that I was against in these cases were female, okay? And in general, the female judge on the circuit was assigned to the family law day, okay? So what I'm saying is we do need to make sure that it breaks out to the male leaders and the decision makers out there. And if we can't break out, well, then we need to break in the back door and keep lobbying. Developments have been made. In fairness, the refuge, and Kathleen would probably agree with me, Kuhn and the refuge system around the country, it has been prioritised, has been invested in. There's been other investments as well to tackle gender-based violence and domestic violence and so forth. And there's an awareness now, and women are coming forward, thanks to Kathleen and people like her, for coming out public. They're coming forward. The good news is they're coming forward so much, and rightly so, because the figures are way up, is that we do need more resources. Exactly as Kathleen said, we now need more.
And do you have any idea why, you're just saying the figures are staggering for domestic violence and that kind of thing in Ireland?
1 in 4, 1 in 3.
Do you have any idea why? Do you have any idea why it is?
I think it's a combination of things. I think, first of all, there was a lot of stuff that before people didn't speak about, they didn't report, they didn't come forward. So one really good thing about the awareness is people are coming forward. And then I also think that there is this kind of and this is why we do have to be really careful that we try and stop this in this track, but there is this really kind of dangerous misogynistic tone creeping into everything. We see it in Trump and how he addresses women.
So it's not just Ireland, it's in a lot of countries it's the same, is it?
It's emboldening that type of a belief, you know.
And Kathleen knows this, but it's actually in the House. It's in the European Parliament.
Yes, sure, you
So I was speaking at a committee meeting. It's a committee called Petitions. It's not a legislative one. So it's one that doesn't make legislation, but it does allow petitions to come from constituents of ours, whether they're in Kerry or Cork or Clare or Carlow or Kilkenny, and they can come with how they feel that their European rights haven't been vindicated by European law and by the institutions. I was speaking at that committee, and I was interrupted by a Polish MEP who's in a far-right group, and the misogynistic treatment was basically 3 pig-like snorts at me, which was recorded, and which I stopped the meeting because I had the presence of mind.
I'm reading about this.
I stopped the meeting. I had the presence of mind to say, Chair, we need to pause now because I've just experienced something, which is a personal attack, a misogynistic attack, and only that. And it's all recorded and we can look at it. And there's a formal complaint going on and so forth. And rightly so. But
you had to actually stop the meeting.
I had to stop the meeting.
The chair should have actually said, hang on a second, this is not, you know what I mean? Like the chair should have intervened.
And then you see Trump calling, journalists pigs and stuff like that. So
that's exactly the point.
And we've our young boys looking
all
at that.
That's the thing.
Ladies, I could go on about this. I could go on about this forever, but we have to wrap up. And I have 2 questions that I ask every podcast guest. So don't be going on too long now, right? What advice would you give young people today, Kathleen?
Young women or just young people?
Do you know what? It's generally what advice would you give young people, but how about for the day that's in it? What advice would you give young women today?
So I would say just don't be afraid to go after what it is you want to achieve and want to do, and don't ever think that you can't do it. Don't also get too worried or concerned about exams and the Leaving Cert. I feel strongly that our school system is so much focused on academics that it doesn't always see the whole person, and it can be a really stressful and difficult time, and there's so many paths in life. So just always try and also always try and stick to your beliefs, and don't let anybody kind of bring that down in yourself.
And Cynthia?
I'd say all of that again, but I won't because I'm going to be short, but that's so important, Kathleen's message. But I would say, be kind and be respectful and think of the other person. There's always somebody better off than you, but more importantly, worse off than you. And you should, as a citizen, as a community member, a family person, as a loving, caring individual, you should help the person who's less well off. Do something for them. Turn it into action.
And my final question is, what is the meaning of life?
Oh, whoa. Gosh. That's a big one. That's a big one to end on. What is the meaning of life? I think you have to to try and leave this world in a better place than we found it. And like for me, it's always been about trying to advocate for positive changes, particularly for marginalised. And then in general, like just enjoying and literally live. It's a bit cliche to say, but you never know what your last day is going to be. And, you know, particularly for your family. And we have a really lovely family event coming up in my family. My younger sister's getting married soon, and it's a great buzz. And I just feel like some days when we're discussing stuff like that, it's like that is what it's all about, your family and your circle. But definitely try and leave this place in a better condition than what you found it.
The meaning of life, I couldn't have said it better than Kathleen. That's why she's such a successful and brilliant politician, and I mean that, and she knows it. And carpe diem. Seize the moment.
Yes, that's great.
Seize the moment, you know, and also you can and you will. And I go back to, but in doing all of the you can and you will and the seizing the moment, be kind, be respectful, be loving.
Ladies, it has
We
been...
should be in charge of everything.
we absolutely should, and it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to the both of you.
Likewise, Laura.
We're just, our time is up, so we'll have to do it again sometime. But
Yes.
pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
This podcast episode is brought to you by the Brillo Cleaning Collection. I've recently brought the air fryer back into full rotation in our house. And when I say full rotation, I mean every single day, every single meal. The boys are absolutely obsessed. So the rule in our house is simple. If you use it, you clean it. And that's where the Brillo air fryer cleaner comes in. It makes the job genuinely easy. You simply spray it on, leave it for 30 seconds, wipe and rinse. And you're done. No endless scrubbing, no trays soaking in the sink. It's Good Housekeeping approved, meaning it's been rigorously tested by consumers and expert panels. And Brillo has 6 products in their new cleaning collection, all designed for the toughest household tasks. From unblocking the drain to getting your oven clean in minutes, not hours. So, if you're dealing with mould, limescale, or any of those stubborn jobs around the house, there's a Brillo product for it. Always follow preparation and usage instructions. Available nationwide.